Ring rust little issue for Tank Davis on Saturday night. The undefeated champion knocking out Frank Martin in the 8th round to defend his WBA lightweight title and improve to a perfect 30-0, 28 of those victories coming via the knockout. This was Davis's first fight in 14 months, but the lethal left as powerful as ever. In with reaction, we say hello to CBS Sports fight analysts Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell. Fellas, always great to be with you. The power was one thing, the positioning another. Luke, as you watched this fight take place, it felt like Tank Davis was dictating where he wanted it to happen, even in those early rounds where maybe he was giving way to Martin. What did you make of the way that he strategically picked apart his opponent here, even in those late rounds?
Yeah, I'm not going to say effortless, but I am going to say it all kind of came natural to him. You can see that when Frank Martin moves and protects himself, he is a well-rehearsed student of the game. And I don't say that in any kind of pejorative way, but you can see him thinking very clearly about hand position, which way to roll, how to exit at what time. Whereas with Tank, everything just kind of flows much more naturally. During the course of the week, Leonard Ellerbe, who was previously the CEO of Mayweather Promotions, had said, you know, when Frank started boxing in 2017 professionally, Tank Davis was already a world champion. That was kind of the difference. So you saw him barreling down right on top of him, high horns the whole time to kind of bait him, get a sense of range, get a sense of timing, combination, the whole nine. But around round 4 or so, Joe, you could see everything begin to turn. He knew exactly where he needed to be. He was pressing Frank Martin, and that made him increasingly more hesitant. And by the time in the rounds, what was it, round 8, he was pinned against the ropes. He ate a monster uppercut, and you just can't take punches from a guy like that with Tank Davis. So really, and again, not an effortless exertion by Tank Davis, but certainly one that didn't look like it was all that challenging in the end.
Yeah, part of why he looks almost effortless, as Luke is saying, is the efficiency. There are no fighter in this world, and right now I do have Tank Davis in my top 10 CBS pound-for-pound best boxers on the planet that are as efficient as what Gervonta Davis does, taking away the jab of Frank Martin by constantly crowding him with pressure, but never wasting punches, which would leave him open for counter shots. He was able to walk Martin from corner to corner, and you really saw ultimately the inexperience for Frank Martin on this level against that. And when I mentioned efficiency, how about this for stats brought to you by the fine folks at CompuBox? Davis landed 44% of his punches overall, which is astounding, but 53% of his power shots. So when you can take away the jab of Frank Martin, which essentially allows Gervonta to walk onto his porch at will all night, and he can position his opponent where he wants to, it became a matter of if, yeah, when, not if, from the standpoint of would those chopping lefts continue to break down Frank Martin. In that 8th round, we saw a beautiful uppercut set up, a lights out left cross that looked to knock out Frank cold. You give Frank Martin credit for getting back to his feet. But when Tank is able to land those fight-changing punches, it doesn't just change the course of the fight, it ends it. And that's what we saw in this evening. Unmistakable power, and the reason many come to watch these types of fights, Tank Davis gives them what they did come for here in the main event. I always enjoy looking back at the buildup to these fights once we do have a result to see where people were right, where people maybe got it wrong. The layoff was the big discussion leading into this one. 14 months incarcerated for some of that. BC, as you took this fight in person, did you get any sense of a residue of that layoff? And if there was any shaken quickly here, how surprised were you at the lack of for Tank Davis here in this performance? Yeah, I didn't think he looked, rusty at all. You did hear Tank Davis being his biggest critic afterwards and saying, look, took me a little bit of time to get adjusted. I did feel rusty. I think the reason why we didn't see that was not only did he really never allow Martin to get into any kind of serious groove outside of maybe winning 2 of those 4 early rounds just by matching what Davis put out there, but Davis typically takes his time at the beginning against every fighter, downloads that information, but once he feels like he's picked up your rhythms, your patterns, he can walk you down. Now, I give Frank Martin credit. Even though he was pinned against the corner for most of this fight, which is the worst place you want to be in, there were times he was able to land big left hands to get out of trouble, to work his way back into the middle of the ring. But Tank was never in any kinds of trouble. You saw a little swelling, little mark around his right eye. But this was one-way traffic from one of the best fighters on this planet. And when you look at the star-studded division and you think about what could be next, Tank Davis is only going to continue to climb this pound-for-pound list the more he continues to take on elite, dangerous foes in their prime, just like Frank Martin. But what we've continued to see is that Davis is up here. Everybody else is a little bit down here, and it's not just the power. If it was just that, he would get figured out. But it's that complete package of the IQ, how natural he flows around the ring, that he never wastes punches, and like we talk about, when he does catch up with you, it lands a big impact. When have you seen fighters be able to use just the threat of their power, not the actual punches, to force their opponent out of what they do best? That's what happened tonight. If I'm surprised by one thing, it was that Frank Martin had this much trouble really trying to find any form of offense outside of one punch at a time.
Yeah, for me, the thing I take away in terms of the question, like about ring rust, you didn't learn anything new about Gervonta Davis with this performance. Like, he didn't show a new wrinkle. There wasn't some kind of new height that was reached. Frank Martin didn't pull some kind of other gear out of him with a very difficult performance. He kind of cruised in the way you typically see him cruise. But here's the thing you have to think about. He was off 14 months. And remember something, heading into the Ryan Garcia fight, Tank elected to take an earlier Hector Garcia fight in Washington, D.C., which he did not necessarily need to take, but it made him, when he went into the Ryan Garcia fight, much more prepared. This was a good opponent in Frank Martin. I don't mean to insult him in any way, but what a tune-up for a guy like Gervonta Davis, getting back at a credible challenger in Frank Martin, but not one that was so difficult. So to your point, Joe, did you see something spectacular and brand new out of Gervonta Davis? No. But talk about getting back on your feet. Hell of a performance, hell of a fight, great opportunity for him.
That being the retrospective, we always end up looking forward next, especially when you're sitting at 30-0. You know nothing but knockouts, relatively speaking. It's exactly what we wanted to see. It's the step forward, but then there's the next step. He was non-committal in calling out any one of those big names in the division or others following this fight, Luke. What makes most sense for Tank Davis next?
Okay, so I'm just going to give you the two things that I think are both the one I want to see the most, I think what most fans want to see, and then what might be most realistically next. So the one I want to see is Shakur Stevenson. Now, Shakur Stevenson has a fight in July. It's his last one. He fights for Top Rank, which is associated with ESPN, which doesn't mean that the fight couldn't happen under those auspices, but if he's got one more and then signs with PBC, who Tank is signed with, then there's nothing at all obstructing that fight. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but there's a lot of hope and certainly some speculation that that could be next. However, this week we got kind of clued in about what is much more likely to be next, namely a fight with Vasily Lomachenko. Bob Arum, the promoter of Lomachenko, has said, and again, another guy signed with Top Rank, by the way, but this is not going to be his last fight. He didn't want to say everything was done. He didn't want to say he could commit to it already. He just said it was something that they were looking at and what they really wanted to do. I tend to think, I don't know when it's going to happen, probably later this year, but if I had to guess, it might be Tank Davis, Vasily Lomachenko at some point in Q3, Q4.
Let's not forget about a potential wild card here, Luke, when we're talking about the idea of Ryan Garcia, who Tank Davis knocked out in their blockbuster last April. Ryan Garcia, in the meantime, when Tank was away, of course, scored his own big upset of Devin Haney, took over the headlines, failed the drug test, and really has made daily buffoonery of himself in many ways on social media, although he does seem to be going through some serious life challenges, both mental and the illness of his mother. But Ryan Garcia was in attendance in the MGM Grand Garden Arena wearing a T-shirt that said Tank's #1 fan on the front. It said, "Rematch me," boop, on the back. We saw the two fighters embrace and hug on the apron after the fight. They were very friendly. That fight did major blockbuster money in ways that I think even the promoters didn't predict. Even though we'd love to see him in title unifications, like Luke said, against Stevenson, against Lomachenko, sometimes money does rule. I wouldn't be surprised if Tank takes a few cold phone calls from Ryan Garcia to figure out what could be next as well.
Brian Campbell, Luke Thomas, the best in the business. I always enjoy our brand of buffoonery as well. Thank you, fellas. Here's a look at those last 5 for Tank. I mean, it's what he does. Here on Saturday night, Frank Martin feeling the wrath of that left hand, uppercut to left hook. Stunning stuff, but falling in line with the performances of past.